Thank you, Madhu, and I thank you for arranging this presentation. And I also thank Cynthia for coming to this presentation. Um, the presentation is on human capital returns, how they vary across religious affiliations in Canada. And I have my slideshow on the screen, hoping everyone can see it. Okay. On the right-hand side, on top corner, you will see a little icon, which I cannot get rid of. So I was hoping I'll be able. Do you see that too?
No, we don't see anything.
Okay, that's good then. That's good. Okay, I see it, but I don't know why. So now I'm a professor of economics at St. Mary's University here in Halifax. And Halifax is the capital city of the province of Nova Scotia on the eastern coast. As they say, it's just across the pond from you. And some students have also joined me in this room where we are. Already, Matloob saw Maya Sardamel and Moshinul Karim, who is the co-author of this paper, also joins us. He was a former MAE student at St. Mary's, now doing PhD at Dalhousie University. So before we start looking at the impact of religious affiliation on human capital returns, it is, I think, important for contextual reasons to look at some immigration trends in Canada, because they have shaped up the current religious composition of population. So my slide is not moving here. Okay. So here I have presented some data on admissions of permanent residents starting 2011 until 2022. As you can see that there has been a gradual increase up until right before the pandemic, uh, after which, for obvious reason, there was a dip in 2020 and then again picked it up. Before the pandemic, the average hovered around 290,000. It ranged from 250 to about 310,000. And soon after the pandemic, there was a steep rise. That rise is attributed not only to the reopening of visa offices abroad soon after the pandemic, but also the Canadian government's attempt to attract more immigrants in Canada due to the demographic challenges it is facing, arising mainly from aging of population. In 2022 alone, we got about 490,000 immigrants. In 2023, which is not plotted here, was just about the same. Now, these immigrants come from all over the world. So I will show you now what are the top 5 source countries of permanent residents in Canada. And here you can see that many of the non-Western countries comprise these top 5 source countries. USA and United Kingdom were there in 2011, but after that, we don't see their presence. And this also has some context to it. The Canadian government we'll go a little bit of history here. In 1910, the Canadian government introduced a preferred country clause in its Immigration Act, which prohibited admission of immigrants from non-Western European countries. And the idea there was that those who come from Western European countries have got greater capacity to assimilate in Canadian environment. But after the Second World War, this changed, because one thing that happened soon after the Second World War was European economies were rebuilding, because of which lots of opportunities were being created within Europe. And further down the road, we saw formation of European Union, and further down the road, the bringing down of Berlin Wall. So all this made it easier for workers to move within Europe. So people were finding more opportunities within Europe, close to home, and they didn't see good reason to go across the pond. As a result of which, immigration slowed down quite rapidly soon after the Second World War. But Canada needed people, lots of land, but very few people. So in 1961, the Canadian government abolished that preferred country clause, which was fully promulgated in 1967. And after that, we see gradual increase in immigration from non-Western European countries, mainly from Asia and Africa. And then over the late 80s and 90s, immigrants become more dominant coming from those countries. So as a result, we see now that there is more influx of immigration from Asia and Africa compared to Western European countries. Also in 2008, during the financial crisis, when there were lots of problems in countries like Portugal, in Italy, in Greece, people in Canada were expecting that there will be more immigration taking place from there, but that did not happen. For similar reason, people were able to find more opportunities within, closer to home, than finding it important to move to North America. So that's a little bit of a context there. So as a result of this changing composition of immigration, we see a change in the ethnic composition of Canadian population, as well as the religious composition. So as a result of these changes.
Sorry, can I just very quick? Sorry, could I just quickly ask what is meant by permanent residents? And you say arrivals at the end as well. So it's people coming in are already given kind of residence status?
Yeah, so these are immigrants who are coming in as permanent residents of Canada to get the PR status. Otherwise, those who come as temporary residents, they could be temporary foreign workers or international students. So these are the permanent residents who have rights to, they can work in Canada, they can vote, participate in provincial elections in Canada, and after meeting the residency requirements of 3 years, they become eligible to apply for citizenship.
Okay,
but it also turns out that the rights of Canadian citizens are not too much different from the rights of permanent residents. So permanent residents are like the green card holders in the US. But the green card holders in the US have got much fewer rights compared to American citizens. But in Canada, the rights of citizenship and the rights of permanent residents are not much different, except that the permanent residents cannot find jobs, cannot work for federal government jobs, and they also cannot vote in federal elections. And Irene Bloomrad from Stanford University has done a lot of work in this regard on what happens to you economically as you turn from permanent resident to citizenship. So as of today, the visible minority population in Canada, and by visible minority, in visible minority, we exclude the Aboriginal population. There are about 27% of population which is comprised of visible minorities. That's about 9.6 million. And the highest proportion is of South Asians, which is 7.1% of population, followed by Chinese and Black Canadians. So this is the visible minority composition, and most studies that have been done in literature to look at the labor force, at differential labor force performance of ethnic minorities, treat them as homogeneous groups. And there is a lot of work done in this regard as to how the labor force participation, labor force performance varies across groups identified by visible minority status. And within those visible minority status, each group is treated more or less homogeneous. However, in each group, we have different religious compositions as well, which can affect their labor market performance. So in this study, what I'm trying to do is to look at the labor market performance of various religious groups in Canada. And we will look at why, theoretical reasons for why we think the performance could vary. So these are the major religions in Canada as revealed in 2021 census. That was the latest census. Canadian census is done every 5 years, and they ask questions on religious affiliations every 10 years. So the last time the question was asked was in 2021. The next census will be 2026, but the question will be asked in 2031. So as is obvious here, Christians comprise the major part of religious composition. So there are about 54% Christians, and those who declared no religion and secular perspectives are about 35%, followed by others who are 12.2%. So it is the others that we will now look at because their composition is rising. These are the other religions in Canada. So as a percentage of national population, Buddhists comprise about 0.9%, about 1%. Okay, Hindus 2.3, Jewish 0.9, Muslims are about 5%. Okay, and then Sikhs and traditional spirituality, North American indigenous. So these are the North American indigenous population. Their labor market performance is affected by different dynamics. There are different, there is a historical context to it, and they are to be treated differently from what the immigrant religious groups are. So in this study, when I will come to look at the economic performance, I will look at only the economic performance of immigrant religious groups, because the performance of the indigenous groups is determined in a different manner. It has a historical context to it, which doesn't compare with what immigrants face. So here is the outline of the presentation. We'll also look at some theoretical perspectives and framework for empirical analysis. Okay, and then I'll present a empirical model, results, and conclusions and directions for future research. So we are looking at the economic integration of Canadians according to their religious affiliation by studying their labor market indicators, which include participation in labor force, unemployment rate, employment income, and rates of return to their human capital investment. Now, as far as participation labor force, unemployment rate, and employment income are concerned, I will only present the broad data there without correcting for their demographic differences. The idea is to just give the viewers an idea of where each religious groups stand. And then we will look at some econometric analysis of their employment income based on which we calculate the rates of return to their human capital investment. Okay. So as I had mentioned earlier, and we saw this, increasing inflows of permanent residents is adding to religious and ethnic diversity of population. And there is dearth of studies in Canadian academic literature and studies who look at the impact of ethnicity, treat each ethnic group as homogeneous. And finally, there is recent violence against certain religious groups, which poses the question that are these groups affected by, or do these groups face barriers in labor market? And to give you some idea here, there are some news items which we often see about Jews facing more hate crimes, Muslims facing more violent ones. And this was Statistics Canada survey, which was reported in Global News. World Economic Forum reported that there was religious violence on the rise in Western countries. And in Australia, some research showed that there was religious discrimination on the rise around the world. So here we look at some of the labor market indicators. So labor force participation rates are the highest among Hindu immigrants, followed by Sikhs, and then Jewish and Muslim have just about the same participation rates. As I said, that these have not been corrected by differences in age and education, but given that these groups are immigrant groups, we do not expect much difference in their age composition. Okay. So, but one can expect some difference in other characteristics like their marital status and so on, which needs to be corrected. These are some broad data on unemployment rates, which show here that among the non-indigenous groups, Muslims have the highest unemployment rate. And again, these are not identified by their year since migration. It will be interesting to see if those who arrived after 2001, if they faced more barrier to employment compared to those who had arrived before. And Christian population is mostly Canadian born, and we see lower unemployment rate there. The national unemployment rate being just about 10%. And finally, these are, yes?
Sorry, quick question. Was that 2020 total for total other religion, total Canada, total immigrants?
Total is total Canada.
And for the entire year, 2020?
For 2020, yes.
Okay, I'm just thinking about, I mean, that's the pandemic and so it's
Yes,
it's about
that is
10%
correct. So
on
these
average.
results, yeah, so these results are affected by the 2020 pandemic. We didn't have these 2021 census asked questions about 2020 labor market. And these results are, but then all the groups are affected by the COVID. Later on, when I do my econometric analysis there, I have introduced a control variable for the COVID.
Okay, thank you.
Syed, I have a quick question. This is Pani from Middlebury.
Yes.
Are you able to hear me? Yeah, good. So as
Yes.
far as the unemployment benefits, or how generous are those benefits in general? I mean, like, is it the same across groups or is it different? How is it?
The unemployment benefits do depend upon how people have participated in the labor force. If they are able to demonstrate that they were looking for job and to become eligible, they should have worked a certain amount of time to become eligible for unemployment benefits. It does vary across religious, it can vary across groups, but I haven't looked into that here.
But usually what is the maximum length? Like, is it, for example, in US pre-COVID, it used to be like 26 weeks, but is it any maximum or how does it work?
The maximum is about 3 months.
3 months. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. And here's the average employment income. Again, without controlling for any of the demographic effects, we find that Jewish population has the highest employment income, and similar results, similar pattern has been shown for other countries like in the US and in Australia as well. The Jewish population tends to have the highest earnings. However, if you compare over time, then some studies have also shown that the gap between Jewish population and the majority Christian population has narrowed down. So far, we only discussed how labor market indicators vary by religious affiliation, and religious affiliations are also self-declared in the census. But then, of course, the question arises as to how religious people actually are. They may declare that they are Muslim, Jews, Hindus, and so on, but how much Jewish they are, or how much Muslims they are, or how Hindu they are. So this is where the religiosity comes in, and it becomes important to look at what is the incident of religiosity in each group. The census does not ask question about religiosity, but there have been some past surveys conducted by Statistics Canada where they did look at the incidence of religiosity and had different questions with respect to that. And religiosity indexes could include the attendance at the mosque, at the place of worship, how frequent people offer their prayers, and how much they are involved in religious activities, how practicing religious they are, and so on. So studies have shown that people who are active in religious congregations tend to be happier and more actively and more civically engaged than either religiously unaffiliated adults or inactive members of religious groups. And this is a Pew Research Center analysis of survey from the United States, which has shown that people who are more active in Group religious activities are happier and more civically engaged. So it becomes important to look at, does participation in religious groups help a religious person? So participation in religious groups may help religious individuals experience higher level of belonging and meanings. And does participation in religious community increase religious engagement? This is also some studies in the US who have looked into this and found that people who participate in community religious activities engage more in civic activities and are happier. So here I found one results from one survey that has been done in Canada, which looked at incidence of participation, frequency of participation in group and in individual religious or spiritual activities. So it's a long table, but I will go over this, over some of the interesting results. Okay, the first column here shows the population share, and you can see that 3.7% Muslims is just about the same as we saw in the census data. So participation in groups at least once a month, the group participation, that is the highest among Sikhs, about 48%, followed by Muslims, 42%. And then there are others who show a significant difference. So this is in groups at least once a month. In groups less than once a month, but individually at least once a month, we find that their participation of each of these groups is lower, except for some. For example, in case of Buddhists, it increases. And wherever you see N means that there is a lot of variability in the data, because of which we cannot give it a meaningful, the result cannot be viewed as meaningful. Those who participate in groups or individually at least once during the year. Again, here the participation by Muslims is much lower, only 15%, because their participation, as you'll see, is more frequent on weekly or monthly basis. Then there is no participation among groups. And the last column here is important. What is the importance of religious or spiritual beliefs and how to live one's life? And here we see that among Muslims, this is about 82%, followed by Sikhs, 84%. So there's large amount of Muslims who believe that their spiritual beliefs are important in determining their daily life. Among Christians, it is more than 2/3. Buddhists is also more than 2/3. So these incidents of religiosity across groups could also affect their labor market performance, to which we will now provide some theoretical perspective. The labor market performance could vary across religious groups owing to both supply side and demand side factors. And supply side factors, to look at the supply side factors, we can consider the labor choice model, in which people make choices between work activity and non-work activity. And religiosity indicators determine how much of their time people will be willing to spend at work. And this will be determined by attendance at place of worship, observation of prayers, and daily practices for religious reasons. So there are certain religious norms and practices that prohibit the followers from doing certain kinds of jobs. For example, Muslims are not allowed to eat pork or drink alcohol, so they would not want to work in restaurants where these items are served. They are also not allowed to give or take interest. This could prohibit them from working in a bank. Women would wear hijab for religious reasons. These practices could affect the kind of jobs they would do. In Israel, about 70% of Orthodox Jews prefer studying Judaism over paid employment. So that could also affect the extent to which they participate in the labor force. And then there are other religious groups who also have religious practices that they have to follow on daily basis. Christians also have to, Orthodox Christians also have to pray certain times during the day. So all these can affect the labor supply, the extent to which people are willing to offer their services in the labor supply, in the labor market. Which would mean that employers who want to attract workers will have to offer certain incentives to them. They either have to be accommodative at the workplace, provide people time if people in certain religious groups have to offer prayers during certain times of the day. Accommodation, employers will have to make accommodation for them if they want to attract them to work in their organizations. But at the same time, employers who offer such conveniences, they may have to also ask employees to take some wage cuts. So that's where the theory of compensating wages comes in. So employers may have to they will look at both benefits and costs of this. The benefit is in terms of getting the worker on job, but the cost is in terms of lost time, lost work time. And to compensate for that, employers may offer lower wages to such workers. Okay. And then there are demand side factors as well. Market attitudes towards religious minorities, how employers view, majority employers view religious minority workers. And here Becker's theory of discrimination comes in, which says that employers who are discriminatory will discount workers' productivity and will be willing to take a cut in their profit to increase their utility by not employing most productive workers. So that also plays an important role from the demand side. So Becker's taste for discrimination hypothesis, which says that employers may have normative judgment about worker productivity in certain groups and may be willing to take cut in their profit, cut in their bottom line, okay, to satisfy their taste for discrimination. So in this empirical study, I take human capital theory as the basis for specifying earning model, which is essentially based on Mintzer's 1974 study, okay, in which earnings are expressed as functions of age squared education. Age is used as a proxy for post-schooling labor market experience. Census doesn't ask question about labor market experience, so age is used as a proxy. And education is one of the important human capital variables. In the extended model, we include demographic characteristics, XJ variables, and XI variables are dummy variables for religion. Based on this regression model, we calculate rates of return to human capital variables, which include education and experience. And these are the formulae which are straightforward to look at the returns to education and returns to post-schooling labor market experience. The data that we use for this study are 25% sample of the Canadian population census. And we got access to these data from Atlantic Research Data Center. Statistics Canada has data centers across the country. There is one located at Dalhousie University here, to which all the universities in Nova Scotia are members, and they all contribute to having that center here from Statistics Canada. The unit of analysis here is a person who acquired a post-secondary education, was employed or self-employed full-time, full year in 2020, worked at least a week, earned a positive employment income, and lived outside of the 3 territories. So Canada has 10 provinces and 3 territories. Territories have very small population base. And again, their economies are determined in a different way. We have excluded them. Here are some sample characteristics of population based on the variables that we used in earning model. It lists all the demographic and human capital variables. So just to go through this quickly, the overall population of the sample is about 79,000, and the average age is 43. The overall population worked about 47 weeks during the year, and the education was 16 years of education, which across the religious groups is also about the same, a little higher than the overall, because among the Christian population, we find it's only 15 and a half. We also broke down the education by Canadian degree versus non-Canadian, and 83%, about 82% have obtained their post-secondary education in Canada. And among the immigrant religious groups, Muslims have only 39%, while Sikhs have 28%. So while Muslims comprise the most among the other religious groups, their education level is much below than the national average. Only half of them have acquired their degree in Canada. So if people have any question, any insights about these sample characteristics, otherwise we can move to the next table.
Now, I have one quick question.
Yes.
Sorry, I have one quick question. When you look at visible minority, I mean, how is it coded? What is it?
Yeah, so the visible minority mostly include people who have non-European background and also non-indigenous background. Okay. So those who have indigenous affiliation, indigenous background are not included among visible minorities. And there are about 26% of those in Canadian population now. Mostly comprise South Asians, about 7%, followed by Chinese, about 5%. And then Black Canadians are 4% in that. And some demographic forecasters have suggested that by year 2060, the visible minority population will dominate in Canada. So they will no longer be visible minority.
So visible, I mean, that the word kind of is, so is it non-whites? I mean, is that what the?
Yes, non-whites, non-indigenous.
Non-white, non-indigenous, but so
Yes.
what's the Christian here then? These are also non-white.
Yeah.
Both
So there are 25% Christians, and there are many Christians who are also immigrants who have come from African countries like Nigeria, Kenya, and other countries, as well as from Europe and United States, who have Christian. I'm sorry, yeah, among visible minorities, African Christians are included in there, yes.
and what about the Jewish?
Among the Jewish, we also have that's only about 3%. So there are Jewish immigrants also coming from non-European, non-white countries.
Okay.
Like from Iran, there are many Jewish immigrants from Iran.
Okay. Okay, thank
There
you.
may be some from Africa as well. Yes.
So, sorry, it has nothing to do with their complexion of their skin, right? It is not. It's basically where they are coming from.
Well, it
Right?
seems
Visible
like it is
minority,
like
it is.
it is
Visible.
their skin, like it's non-white. I mean, I think it's
Yeah.
that's the visible. That's why I was kind of confirming. It's a visible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, what I thought was maybe it has something to do with their wardrobe or that. So,
No.
So okay, now I understand. Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Okay. So South Asians comprise the most group, but yes, we see 3% Jewish groups also, okay, who may have come from certain African countries or from countries like Iran. Okay, so there are no other questions in relation to this, then we can move on to our results.
You have about 10 minutes, Ather.
Okay, sure. I think I will be done sooner than that, yeah. So we use the regression model to look at earning in each group relative to those declaring no religion or had secular perspective. And these results here, the previous results that we saw in the bar charts didn't control for any demographic or human capital characteristics, but here they are controlling for that, and we find that Muslims have a 10% disadvantage compared to those declaring no religion. I don't know if I should even have those, because other comprises of all other smaller groups, which is very heterogeneous. Sikhs and Christians have no difference. Okay, so when you see that dash there, that means that there's no statistically significant difference between Christian population and Sikh population in terms of their income compared to those who have secular perspective. Jews have the highest earning advantage, about 15%. Any questions there?
So what's the possible explanation of that for Christians and Sikhs, for instance?
For Christians and Sikhs, for Christian population, there is a majority population there, as we showed before, that those with secular perspective are about 35%, and Christian perspective are also about more than 60%. So there is large population of both groups in there, which could explain that that being no difference. And among Sikhs, this is something that we need to explore more. Sikh population is also small compared to other religious groups, but this needs to be explored more, yes.
Okay, thank you.
So here we looked at if having a Canadian degree over a foreign degree had an advantage, and we saw that in all cases, there is an advantage to have a Canadian degree. Overall, there's 20% advantage to having a Canadian degree over a foreign one. Again, we find interesting result that for Jews, this advantage is only 11%, which is the least. So again, something that we need to delve more into. That they don't gain more by pursuing a Canadian degree. Okay.
But I think from what you showed from your raw statistics, I thought that more Jewish folks get degrees from Canada anyways. It's not like they're getting degrees from elsewhere, you know what I mean? So maybe that could be the explanation behind the scenes. I mean, you know what I mean?
Yeah, so very few Jews who are getting their degree from abroad, and most are getting their degree in Canada. So it maybe there is some merging effect in the two because they're so small in number. So it wipes out the difference. But again, this is something that needs to be explored more. Yeah. And finally, we look at the returns to education. Nationally, the rate of return to education is 6.3%.
Could you explain what is exactly the education here?
So education is the number of years of post-secondary education.
Okay, so it's not a degree related thing, right? So it's the number of years. It's not
number of years. Yes.
Okay. Do you have information on? There is this whole argument of sheepskin effect and all that. I mean, can you separate out those with degrees?
Yeah, we have that information, but here we only looked at post-secondary education, which includes university and colleges. So it doesn't specify what will be the difference if you had a university degree.
Yeah, no,
So
I was just saying to do extra,
Yeah.
if it's the information is available to see how that makes a difference.
Yes, yes, that is something that we will. Thank you for mentioning that. Yeah. And Christians have the highest return, followed by Jewish at 6.3%. So previous studies, like for example, there's one study done by Barry Chiswick in the US, which found that the Jewish population had the highest rate of return to education in the past. And he found similar results for Canada. But now more recent results are suggesting that Christians and Jews are somewhat similar in terms of returns to education. And for other countries also, it has been found that the gap is narrowing. So those were my results. I know that we have very little time left. So in terms of conclusions and directions for future policy and research, of course, some directions for research have been mentioned in this presentation by the audience, and we have made note of those. What we have seen here is that rising inflows have resulted in greater diversity of population by ethnicity as well as religion. and significant variations exist in labor market performance. And we will look at whether these differences are due to supply side factors or more due to demand side factors, and whether they vary within a single religious affiliation. Now, this is also important that within single religious affiliation also, there is diversity. So among Muslims, there is different sects, the Shias, Sunnis, and so on. Similarly, among Christians, there are different sects. Thus, the result vary according to the sectoral composition of each religious group. And again, there is an intersection between ethnicity and religion, which also should be looked into this, that how much of these results we explain due to ethnicity and how much due to religion. And that's why we also had a visible minority indicator in the regression equation to separate out the effect of ethnicity. And these further future research will also help us indicate what accommodations are to be made at religious practices to allow for religious practices of workers at the workplace. The role of religious organizations is also important in encouraging participation. So that's all for my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Ather. Any questions?
Yes. Can you please specify, did you try to account for possible selection into different fields based on religiosity? For example, some groups might be more likely to go into medical occupations, which pay much more, etc.
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking that. One of our variables, labor market variables, was occupation, and we did control for professional occupations there. But the sample selection resulting due to religious groups is an important phenomena which could cause selection bias in there. But just to overcome that, we threw in a professional occupation variable in the regression equation.
But this occupation variable is how detailed is it? Is it 1 digit or is it 2 digit or more space?
Yeah, we only identified professional versus non-professional occupations.
Okay, so it doesn't distinguish between lawyers and doctors.
Yes.
And physics.
So is there an indication that it could vary across religious groups? Or it could vary by country of origin, maybe? I'm not sure if literature has looked into that. Yeah, thank you.
Almas and then Cynthia.
Oh, thank you very much for the opportunity to ask. Thank you, Metro. My question is, Minter's model as a function of age and education and some characteristics is quite old. The model has developed, generalized, and also we use different estimation methods, so that is positive. But two factors are very important in our time, that is social and knowledge capital, and they influence a lot labor market participation and also earnings, income earning. Then when it comes to your religion factors, Christianity is like Africa and Latin America, their religion was exterminated. Latin America become Christian and African become South Christian and North Muslim. I think one should be able to, by looking at their origins, separate Christians in Europe and those Christians, some emerged from Africa and also from Latin America to be able to have a better distinguishing characteristics of those people. Thank you.
Yes, I agree with that, breakdown by country of origin could reveal some more interesting insights into these results. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cynthia?
Thank you. Mine's just a follow up, and I think it'd be really interesting to see some of the analysis. And I think we've all been saying that, different heterogeneities. And I was wondering, did you put a control for gender, and have you split it by gender? I'm sorry if I missed that.
Yes, sorry about not mentioning that. We have a gender variable in the equation, but also when I presented these results elsewhere, people did point out to the importance of running these results separately for men and women, which we haven't done here just for the sake of to prevent it from getting longer. But definitely that will be a topic of future research as well. In this study, we only had one variable controlling for gender. Yeah.
I think the supply and demand side stories could be different. I think it'd be really interesting. And then just one follow-up thing, when you looked at education in Canada versus other countries, was that for college, PhD, master's, or were they all kind of mixed together?
So the census asked this question from those who had post-secondary education. And by post-secondary education in Canada, we mean more than 12 years of education. So that could be university, college, but they could also be university dropouts, and I haven't separated them. So as was mentioned earlier, that it will be, the sheepskin effect will be important to look at, does having university degree matter? Yeah. And we will include that variable. Yeah. My co-author is also sitting here with me, and he's saying yes, that he agrees.
Pani.
So sorry, one quick question is, when you looked at whatever the control variables you had, I didn't look at the whole list. What about labor unions? Because labor unions are much stronger in Canada compared to the US. So I mean, I would think they might have some effect in terms of narrowing or widening the gap. So did you do anything on that front?
Yeah, one could look into this if there is a reason to believe that certain religious groups tend to be concentrated more in unionized jobs. And of course, we didn't do that in this work. Unions in Canada are also getting, the participation in unions is getting smaller, is getting lower.
Is that why? I mean, I thought that it was steady.
It is stronger. It is still stronger than in the US. Yeah, but it is on a decline. Yeah, it is also interesting to look at if certain religious groups tend to concentrate in unionized jobs. Unions are generally not so much in favor of immigration because there is their membership faces a competition with from the new arrivals. So it will be interesting to look at that. Yeah.
Yeah, because in the US, because unions are trying very, very hard to recruit those new folks who are coming into the country. So in a way, unions feel like that's one way they need to tap in. So I would suspect. And also one thing I know is the Canadian union dues and all that are much lower than the dues they have in the US. So in that way, I mean, I would suspect if you're getting the benefits of being a union member,
yeah,
I would assume. I mean, like, so.
Right. Yeah. That's interesting. We could. The census doesn't ask question about unions, but we can certainly break down certain industries by their degree of unionization. Yeah.
Okay, I think we have about run out of time. Just one thing, this is not you don't have to answer that question. I just want to put this on. I mean, in the title, you say returns to investment in education, which is not really the paper all about, right? So I'm just wondering if it could be something like religiosity and labor market outcome or something like that, because you're not really capturing investment to. I mean, education is obviously one part of labor market performance. So I just my suggestion would be to do to change the title to something like that.
I had human capital returns, in which I have looked at both education and post-schooling experience.
Yeah, but I mean, you've done more things. It's like that's one aspect of it. So it's so labor market outcome is more
Exactly.
You kind of capture those things. The other thing I would say is that try to separate the self-employed versus the wage employed.
Yes, that's some.
Because
Did we
the
have?
discrimination more likely might be happening at the wage employed level rather than the self-employed.
Yeah. Was self-employed? We did not include self-employed.
Because in one of your slides, it said the employment income is for those who are employed in, basically employed in firms and self-employment. So I just picked on that. But I mean, we don't have to go. Have a look at that. So we'll just stop here. Thank you very much for a very interesting presentation, Ather. And thank you everybody to participate and ask questions and stuff.
Thank you for your contributions.
I'll see you next month. Bye.
Thank you. All right. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. Bye now.
Thank you. Goodbye.